I think a lot of philosophers philosophize, but I think my favorite people to follow and learn from are mystics, because they're not philosophizing with their brain. What they're spreading and what they're doing doesn't come out of books, it comes out of your heart. It comes
Mm.
from the love within you, within the core of your soul. And every human being possesses that. Everyone.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Pej, welcome to Broaderlands podcast.
Good to be here.
It's a weird channel for spiritually weird people, so welcome.
Well, then I fit right in.
Now, I wanted to bring you on because we've been good friends over the years for a long time now, and you stayed around being my friend ever since. I got sober when I was pretty much fairly new, and you stuck around, still being my friend, letting me be me and be weird and think outside the box, and I lost a lot of friends because of that. But I can call you a true friend, so I really appreciate that.
I appreciate that too. I mean, I think I grew up feeling abnormal, and after a while, when I started to adapt to my own abnormality, I just thought, you know what, being abnormal is actually, for me, it's normal. It's like what I like to be. Why would I want to? Weirdness is exactly what I like. I like being this way.
Well, weird mistake.
The weird in me recognizes the weird in you.
Yeah. I wanted to bring you on, and I love your story, and I've heard it over the years, and it's profound. And I wanted to kind of incorporate addiction and spirituality, mysticism, and all that good stuff. The human condition.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to point out, because a lot of times I hear people talk about addiction, and then I just heard one recently from a podcast that's back home where I grew up, and they talked about addiction, but they don't really. They talk about the war stories and getting some help, but I really want to kind of let the listener hear about how it affects our brain development, how it makes us feel, and how these emotions become trapped, and within the resentments, there is some kind of hurt, there's some kind of pain, there's some kind of emotional wound, which we know now is trauma. So I would love for you to talk on that. But before we get started, maybe you can share a little about yourself and what we do and what you do. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I myself, I'm a man of recovery. And when I say recovery, like I'm in recovery from drug addiction, from alcoholism. I am an interventionist, a trained interventionist. I intervene on a lot of people's lives nationally and internationally that are struggling with drug addiction and alcoholism. But I'm also a recovery coach. I do a lot of coaching with families, with adolescents, with families of adolescents and adults, and individual coaching too. Just trying to help people recover from their past and show them that there is hope and that they can actually become the best versions of themselves. That's a lot of what I do. I'm very involved in the spiritual world, and I don't just mean in the 12-step spiritual world, but I mean I think outside the box, and I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading and a lot of studying of many different schools of thoughts when it comes to spirituality. And I also own some recovery homes and a men's house, a women's house, and a lot of people that come through there. As you hear my story, you'll understand why I created those homes. They come through there because they were afflicted and addicted to substances, and also they just had a lot of trauma in their lives. And so when they come to our houses, we do everything we can to try to help them reintegrate back into society, but most importantly, have recovery become the main focus of their life. So they embrace the recovery, they get these big, huge, abundant lives. So that's in a nutshell what I do. I do a lot of other things too. I'm a podcast host for a recovery channel called Pej's Recovery Corner, where we bring a lot of different guests on that are either in recovery from substance abuse, or they're professionals in the field that are experts in the field that work with a lot of recovering addicts or alcoholics, and they have a wealth of knowledge, and they come and talk about they educate. Like that's what we do a lot on my TikTok channel, on my YouTube channel. There's a lot of education that I like to put out there in the universe, and from my knowledge base on what I know, I've been a drug and alcohol counselor. I did drug and alcohol studies, so um, yeah, that's in a nutshell who I am and what I do.
Yeah, thank you. So I probably want to you get started with your early life, and because addiction always originates in pain, whether it's we're conscious of it or it's hidden in our unconscious. So
Yeah,
I really want to have you share your upbringing, and maybe point out some areas where it affected you that helped probably make you more prone to becoming an addict. Because a lot of
sure.
times we talk about trauma, and you know this in the 12-step rooms, they some of the old timers are trauma phobic, so and they
Hmm.
don't like to talk about that stuff. But it's important to understand how these painful experiences get trapped in us, where we start to look outside for other substances to get relief. So I'd love for you to
Yeah,
walk us into your life because you have a beautiful story.
thank you. So I'm Iranian. I'm Persian, right? I was born in Germany. Both of my parents were Iranian. They met in Berlin, Germany, and that's where they had me and my sister. And so, right out the gate, being a little Iranian kid growing up in Germany, like my first language was German, and I was in preschool, and that was just what I was speaking. And during that, like around 4.5 years old, my mom took my sister and I back to Iran, and she was in contemplation. She wasn't yet sure if she wanted us to be raised in the mother country, or they definitely were thinking about bringing us to the United States, and maybe raising us here too. So when we went back to Iran, she's Esfahani, my dad is Tehrani. I remember being in Tehran, and there's not a lot that I remember from being in Iran at the age of 4.5, but I do remember that when we were staying at my mom's house, or my aunt's house there. I went downstairs to go uh, outside of the building to go play with these Persian kids, and when I spoke with them in the German language, because that's all I knew, I didn't know how to speak Farsi. They picked on me, and so like bullying was something that I encountered at a very young age. These kids, they pushed me, they picked on me, and they told me not to talk that way. Um, and that way was like the only way I knew how to talk. So already, they were instilling fear within me, and I thought, well, they don't like me here. I'm not going to go outside and play with these kids anymore. So I was like, for the next 6 months, I was indoors a lot, being around, my family and their culture, and probably taking on the Persian language, the Farsi language during that time. We went back to Germany, and my dad stayed in Germany during the time that we were gone. So I remember when we got back to Germany, I was really excited to see my dad again. I missed him so much, and I remember walking, like when we got off the plane. We came out, and I walked through this area, and I saw my dad standing in a just a group of crowded people, and I was so excited to see him. I ran into his arms, and he was everything to me, right? And the thing about my dad was that he was a man full of love, but a man full of rage. And this was from early on. As much as he knew how to express his love, he also, uh, when it came to expressing his anger, he had no control. And sometimes he would make me nap next to him, and I didn't want to nap. Like, but he would nap, and if I got up, he would grab my leg and like put me back in the bed and say, "Stay here." And over a period of time, he started using his hands and objects to get his point across too. And so, like early on in life, I knew that even within the house, I can experience trauma, not just
Mm.
outdoors, right, with other people. And then on top of that, my dad was a hardline Muslim during that time. He was praying 5 times a day. Often he would uh, have me come and pray with him, alongside him. And you have to understand, like, here I am, this little Iranian German speaking kid trying to do an Arabic, like a prayer in Arabic, not knowing any like what I'm praying to or how I'm praying or how to do. I would just follow his lead, and I would go up and down and go through the motions. But I just thought, this is like confusing to me, right? And so there was that. Also, while we were in Iran, my father was he was not faithful to my mother, and he was messing around with a woman. in Germany. And so when my mom came back, she had interactions with that lady, and that lady said that she wanted to take my father for herself to be her man. And my mom said, over my dead body, he's going to raise our kids together. And so my mom's resentments towards my father were already brewing. And I didn't know that all this was going on. I was too young to understand it, but they were not, they were not getting along, and they decided, let's move to the States, United States, as opposed to Iran. And we moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, of all places, like Salt Lake City, Utah. So now we're like these, we are these brown Iranian people that have moved to Mormonville. I mean, it was like it was Mormon, like tons of Mormons everywhere. It was a major culture shock. Not that we didn't come from Germany, where it was already a certain type of culture that we were exposed to and around. But when we got to Utah, we ended up, my very first day of kindergarten, I started kindergarten and I was amongst my peers and I was in a whole new environment. Now I'm learning English. And so I would speak English. I would learn English in school, and I'd come home and my mom would say there's no English in the house. She didn't want us to be speaking. She said, you learn that stuff in school, you speak that stuff in school. But when you come home, you speak Farsi. And so she was teaching us Farsi within the house, and German was kind of just forgot, right? And growing up in Utah was it was an interesting time. It was we got to Salt Lake in 1976, and then the revolution happened in Iran. And right before the revolution, there was hostages that were taken, and they were American hostages. And so, as you know, politically, what was going on in Iran, where these U.S. hostages were taken, I was suffering the repercussions of that from various people. Not all people from Utah were not liking us, right? Like, we were pretty welcomed by the Mormon community when we first moved there with bread baskets and fruit baskets, because I think they definitely wanted us to convert to Mormonism. But, there was a select few people. I remember being in my elementary school, and they would basically push me in puddles or pick on me and say, you're the Iranian kid, and they were upset. Obviously, in their homes, they're probably watching the news. You got these American hostages that were taken in Iran, and so why don't I just become a target for them? So they were beating me up. It was happening quite often, and so there's more abuse and more trauma that was starting to kind of pile up. Now, for a while, we moved to a northern part of Utah, but then we moved back to Salt Lake City, Utah. And in that time, I was like, seventh grade. Life was changing. I was going through an adolescent period. Puberty had hit really hard. I was also, some of the people that I grew up with had grown into different types of people. I was more of a new wave type of kid, and there was one kid that I grew up with before that was more like a heavy metal guy, right? And for some reason, I don't know what happened. Like, he just didn't like me. He didn't like. We were friends as kids, but he didn't like me. And so he said some things to me. He said some things to my mom on the street one day, which then made me very angry, and I saw red. The same anger that my dad had growing up was instilled within me. And so this guy, he was in my junior high school. He walked by me. I saw him approaching me, and he shoved me into the lockers. And the second I fell back, I was so angry. I thought, we could fight right here, right now, and they'll break this up really fast, or we can do what a lot of kids do in this school, and they take their fights behind the Mormon church that was like placed behind our school. And by the time I got back, I told him after school behind the church. By the time I got behind that church, this kid, I didn't think he was going to show up. The whole school caught wind of it. Everybody was back there, and I'm just waiting for this guy, and I'm thinking he probably chickened out. He's not going to come. And I turned my head for 1 second, turned back around, and boom! I mean, he just knocked me out cold, right? And so, like, that the ego within me, the human ego that really thought I was going to go back there and handle this guy, pretty much like I got my ass handed to me, right? And it was one punch. I was out cold, and this guy was stomping on my face. I had braces in my mouth. The braces got caught into my jaw. The entire school saw this, so my ego was totally crushed, right? And I remember when I came to, like, I came out of that whole thing, I looked up and saw everybody looking down at me, and I was humiliated beyond belief. Like, oh my god, like the entire school just saw this, right? Like I can't. I was so embarrassed. Some it was a neighbor lady that came and like kept on pushing me to wake up. So when I got up, she walked me outside of the churchyard, and I was like just staggering and bludgeoned and beaten, and just feeling this sense of humiliation. And I staggered all the way home. And when I got into my house, I didn't want to talk to my mom because she looked horrified when she saw me walk into the house. She was with my sister, and my dad wasn't home from work yet. But when he did get home from work, he came into my room, and I just saw anger in his eyes. He was angry that I would allow somebody to pulverize me the way that that guy did. He said that I should have protected myself, and I felt punished by my father because the next day he told me we're still going to work on the side of the house and we got to paint this roof and or the side of the roof, and so I'm on this ladder the next day and I'm already seething. Like resentments are just building up within me. Like I can't stand the guy that did that to me in front of his name was Vance Stone. Like I can't stand Vance Stone. I'm angry with my father because I got these two big black eyes and he's got me outside painting the side of the house. Like this is the last thing I want to do right now. I haven't even been able to process my feelings. So, I'm just like bogging stuff down within myself. I'm seething, I'm angry. And that anger would just continue. The guy that did that to me, I was angry with that guy for years, for decades. Like I made a vow within myself that I would never allow somebody to hurt me physically the way that guy did in front of anybody or just at all for that matter. And so I was always in fight or flight mode. I was always the rage that my father had definitely was inherited into my being and myself. And then I was of the mindset between the movies I'd see and the TV shows I'd see. I was in the mindset of always like thinking I got to build my empire and be the king of my empire, and nobody will ever be able to take down my kingdom. Right? That's just my mentality. And I loved reading and things like that. Many different types of books. I was definitely a reader as a kid, and so I had a large imagination. And over a period of time, I really hated living in Utah. I just hated living in Salt Lake City, Utah. I thought Utah was the problem. The reason I'm so uncomfortable in my skin is because I don't fit in with these people. I don't look like them. I don't sound like them. I don't talk like them. I try to dress like them, but I'm not them. I even listened to a certain type of music growing up in Utah that not everybody listened to. I like funk music. I like hip hop music when hip hop, that was like shortly after the origination of hip hop had started to grow. And so I was attracted to it. I love James Brown. I love Michael Jackson. I love Prince. These were things that not your average everyday people in Salt Lake City, Utah were listening to. And so I would beg my dad often, what can we do to move out of this miserable state? Like, I beg you, can we, like, we would go on vacation to Los Angeles, to LA, to California. And for me, going to California was like paradise. It was because you go out, like you're in this cold, miserable state that's pretty much cold 8 to 9 months out of the year. And then you go to like a place like California where there's palm trees and there's not even snow on the ground during the winter. And I begged him so much that my dad was really like diligent about trying to find a job outside of Utah because he knew his kids were suffering. And one day when I was 15 years old, he came home and he said, "I've got good news for you. We're moving to California." And sure enough, like within 2 weeks, we were packed up and on our way out to Cali. And for me, it was a beautiful experience because now I'm 15, almost 16. I am starting in a high school as a sophomore. It was a culture shock. I walked into my high school and I looked around. And I was like, "Whoa." Like, there's black people here, and there's brown people here, and there's yellow people here, and there's Persian people here, and like I don't stand out like the token brown kid amongst all the white kids, and there's not even a Mormon around here. Like everyone's either Catholic, Christian, all that stuff. But so it was really cool. Like I immediately felt at home, right? And I started working at this McDonald's restaurant as a young kid, 15 and a half years old on a work permit. And there was this Mexican dude, and he told me, "Are you new in town?" I said, "Yeah, I'm new in town." He said, "You smoke weed? You drink?" I go, "Absolutely, I do." Because I had already experimented a little bit with drugs and alcohol back in Utah with the other outcasts. But that was like that wasn't, anything serious. I even got drunk at a Persian wedding one time, and so like I was already feeling the effect that was produced by alcohol and drugs at a minimal rate. But although I did black out at that Persian wedding, but now this guy who must have been like 30, 31 years old, and I'm 15, 16 years old, he's inviting me to go have fun with him. And we went to this motel, and at that motel was the first time I ever experienced seeing cocaine on a table. I didn't do the cocaine, but I drank and I smoked weed with the guy. And then I remember going home uh, thinking I'm going to get into a lot of trouble because I'm under the influence and it's super late. And my mom was laying in my bed waiting for me when I got there, and she was not happy. Like she just looked in my eyes and she smelled my breath, and um, she told me that, like, we're going to talk with your dad about this the next day, and we did exactly that. And we sat down, and my dad came in with a lot of rage. I wasn't hearing anything that he was saying. It was when your dad just comes at you like aggressively, it becomes a one tone style of hearing. Like I don't hear anything but your anger and your rage, and it's not going to change me. Like I'm just going to become more secretive, or you're gonna make me more rageful, right? But my mom, she came really soft. Like she was always trying to lift me up and empower me and show me the goodness within me. And so she starts talking about, you were so scholastic and artistic and athletic, and who are these people that you're hanging out with that are not good for you? Like in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the doctor's opinion, it says frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices, right? And so like you can come at me with all of this soft talk, but like at this point now, I have now found people that want to have fun. And if what you're going to come at with a frothy emotional appeal, like that stuff isn't going to resonate with me as much as these people that are having fun. So I was already off to the races. And on top of that, they decided to move me to a different school for a better education, which was just another school in another part of town. And really, it wasn't like at this point, like I wasn't going for no better education. I was never really an achiever in grade school. Like I was a daydreamer, right? If the subject didn't appeal to me, I wasn't going to do good in the subject. So like when it came to mathematics and things like that, I was never good at it. I would look around at my peers and think, how do these guys do so good in this stuff? Because I don't even understand what we're talking about. But when it came to like spelling and reading and grammar, I was really good at that for some, because I read a lot. You know what I mean? I like to read a lot. Or art, I liked art. Science, I liked science. History, I even liked history. Like those types of things I liked. But when it came to certain subjects, I didn't do good, so I would totally screw up in school a lot. I was more thinking about other stuff outside the box. Now, when I went to this other school, I turned 16 and I made friends with these two guys. And they were having fun, these two guys, right? Like one was named Amir. He was an Indian guy, like from India. And the other guy's name was Omid, and he was Persian like me. And in our language, Omid means hope. But there was no hope for Omid, right? Like Omid's
Hmm.
dad was working in the hotel industry. He worked late hours. Um, and so he did a lot of cocaine, the father did. And these two guys were already drinking and using, so I'm already hanging out with them and doing the same thing. And I knew, like, at a very young age, like I probably shouldn't be doing this, and my mom would get on my case. So I remember keeping a diary and attempting to stay sober, and even like writing in the diary, I have this many days sober, this many days sober, this is what I'm doing in my life, and this is what I'm doing in my life. But everything turned. Because when you hang out with these people and they're all having fun, you become an oddball. And so I'd be sitting in the room with them thinking, well, God, they're all having fun. And here I am sitting over here trying to stay sober. And I don't even know what sobriety really consists of, but um, it was only a matter of time until I, started picking up and drinking and using and becoming secretive about it and not letting mom find out. And, um, but I didn't know she was also reading my diary. So I was taking notes of this stuff, and she would see this stuff. And
Hmm.
eventually, like, she was in full knowledge of what her son was doing. By the time I was 17 years old, I got my driver's license a year late, right? But I finally got it. My dad gave me this 1971 Super Beetle Volkswagen Bug. It was his car prior to mine, and I was really happy. And I finally have a car. And I called out my friends, and I told them, "Listen, guys, tomorrow morning I'm going to pick all you guys up. We're going to go to school in my car." And I'd gotten drunk the night before. I had gotten high the night before, but the next morning I wasn't under the influence, right? So that morning I'm picking all these guys up and piling them all into the car. I got my girlfriend, I got my sister, 6 people in a Volkswagen Bug. Not recommended. It's too many people to stuff into a little bug. And the music was blaring. It had rained the night before, so the streets were slick. They were wet. And I'm driving up the street, and we were just high school kids having high school fun. I can still, when I imagine, I could still remember it like it was yesterday, the laughter that was in that car, you know? And we got closer to this intersection, and right before the intersection, this little 14-year-old kid was on his bicycle, comes out of nowhere, and darts right out into the street in front of my car. And I couldn't hit the brakes fast enough, and this kid's bicycle and body went over the hood of my car into the windshield. The windshield shattered, and the car kept rolling and crashed into this minivan, and this kid's body was flung over the minivan headfirst into the ground. And my whole world went into slow motion, and I got out of the car, and I looked at all my friends in the car, and they had blood all over their faces from the impact of the broken windshield. That it was just a scene, man. And I remember tasting blood trickling down from my forehead because I'd cut my forehead from the windshield, and it was going into my mouth. And I thought, did I just hit a human body? And I went and looked around the side of this minivan and saw the kid laying face down with blood gushing out the top of his head. And I thought, oh my God, I'm in trouble. And the police came, and an ambulance came, and an ambulance whisked the kid off to the hospital, and the police took me down to the police station, and they asked me a lot of questions. They were, they wanted to see exactly what happened, and I'm just answering these questions to the best of my knowledge, and then they released me. And for the next few days, I was just on the edge of my seat thinking, like, what's going to happen to my life? Like, I knew the kid was on life support. He had not died at the scene, but he didn't have much of a standing chance brain-wise. Like, he had suffered major brain damage from hitting the asphalt. And so his mom kept him on life support for 4 days, but then she ended up taking him off of life support because he would have been a complete vegetable. And so here I'm the 17-year-old kid experiencing such a massive amount of trauma that one could encounter. I didn't know what to do with myself. It was like, how the hell do I live life now? Like, the entire school knows about this. All the schools know about it because the kid went to another high school. What an embarrassment, right? Like, when I was 12, 13 years old, that whole school got to see me get my ass kicked by this guy. And now at this school, everybody sees, like, this guy lost his life. And people would come up to, as a result of me driving this car, people would come up to me on the street and say, hey, Pej, aren't you the guy that killed the kid on the bicycle? And like, that didn't sit well with me. I'd argue them, like, what do you mean killed the kid on the bicycle? Why would you say something like that to somebody? Like, I didn't intend to go out and kill him that day. It was an accident, right? On top of that, this became an ultimate excuse for me to drown my sorrows, my anguish, my sadness, my pain into drugs and alcohol. I was already a frequent user of drugs and alcohol before, but now it just became like an everyday thing. And on top of that, I left my regular high school to go to the other high school, which was one of them schools that was like for people that were not achieving well in school, right? One of them bonehead high schools. And I was in this other school where you don't really participate in class if you even make it to class. And that was kind of like what I was doing. I was hanging out with people. I was hanging out with other people that were lower companions, if you will, right? People that weren't really achieving scholastically in life. And so, you know what? I started getting into a lot of trouble. Like, I was kind of a knucklehead, man. I was a 17-year-old kid just living recklessly and getting into lots of fights and arguments and breaking a lot of laws and just a little criminal, like, out doing criminal activities. And I found my way into some holding cells and some jails, like, to be on hold. And then I finally found my way into juvenile court. And when I was in a juvenile court, I was told by this judge to come to the stand, and that I've been a complete menace to society, and that based off of all of these other crimes that have piled up in the last few months, and on top of that, I had a vehicular manslaughter charge without gross negligence. He decided to put me in juvie, and it was projected for me to go for at least a year, which would have gone well into my 18th year of age. when I was in there, some things happened. They thought I was a danger to myself. They put me in a unit called Unit L, and Unit L was amongst the inmates was called the Looney Unit. It was the psych portion of this detention facility, and when I was in there, like I saw things that I could never erase from my mind. Right. Besides the fact that there was feces and mucus on the walls, there was people in there that were adolescents that had murdered. Some of them because of mental health, some of them because they were gangbangers. But there was never a dull moment in there, even when you're locked down for 21 hours a day, right? And me, I would sit in my cell, and I often ponder and think like, to what has happened? Like, what has become of my life? Like, how did I end up locked up in here? 17-year-old kid counting the bricks on the walls and reading whatever literature I can get into my hands. And at that point in my life, I got to a point where I thought, I've always wondered about God, but I don't think I believe in God now. Like, why would God, if there was such thing as a God, why would God put me in this position? And why would God take that kid's life from him? Like, he didn't even know he was going to die. He was just on his way to school that day, and 4 days later, he's dead, blackout, gone, just like that. I don't have no room for a God like that in my life. I renounced God. Stop believing. I told myself I'm an atheist. What little I knew about what being an atheist meant, I knew it meant not to believe in God at all. Like, there's no existence of God. At least that's what I believe. Then they put this guy in as my cellmate, and this guy was he was a teenager, right? He was a devil worshiper. And so this guy would sit in my cell and start doing seances to the devil. And he would get his hands on Christian magazines and pull out these pictures of different crosses, like artistic crosses. And somehow he got some gum and he put them upside down all around this cell. And he's like doing seances to the devil. I'm like, what the hell is this? So I'm like begging the guard, like, can you please take this guy out of my cell? And in that time, we got this opportunity to go to church sometimes on Sundays. If you wanted to, you get out of your cell for an hour. I mean, I'd take any opportunity to get out of my cell. So I go to church, whatever. But then they also gave you this opportunity to hear a panel. It was an AA panel, right? And I didn't know what a panel was, but they said, does anybody want to hear a message of hope? They popped our doors, and that's what I would hear on the speaker. Anybody would hear a message of hope? I'm like, sure, what does that even mean? But if it gets me out of my cell, let's go. So I go into this room, and this old man would come in. He was a priest. This dude was a priest, right? A priest that had a pack of cigarettes in his pocket right here. It was like amazing to me. I thought, okay, I thought the body was a temple, but okay. But my eyes were fixated on the guy's cigarettes. Like, I wanted his cigarettes more than I wanted his message, but he was coming and reading out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So the message of AA was being carried to me at a very young age, right? 17. But you have to understand, like, at the time, I'm still hip, slick, and cool. Like, I still got a lot of mileage on me. I'm not ready to receive a message. I firmly believe that I became an agnostic during that period, probably because the guy was reading from the big book in the chapter We Agnostics. And I somehow learned that being an agnostic means that you believe in something, but you're just not sure if it's God. Like, you don't want to necessarily label it as God. But so I thought maybe, this whole thing of being an atheist was a little bit, it wasn't too well thought out. And on top of that, like, what if there is such thing as God? And here I am, this hardline atheist. Maybe I could just be an agnostic and call myself that, and we'll just call it a day, right? Like, that's what I'm going to take on. And so for a long time, I kind of just wanted to be of that mindset. And I thought, even getting out of juvie early, like I convinced myself when I would be locked up that when I get out of here, I'm going to be a sober man. I'm going to be a good man. I'm not going to do drugs anymore. I'm not going to hang out with those knuckleheads. It was like there was a little angel on my shoulder telling me all the good stuff, like, you need to do this, you need to do that. But there was this little devil, it seemed like, which was, the ego, whispering in the other ear, but when you get out, you got to smoke a little bit of weed, right? And so it was like this little inner battle within, right? And sure enough, I stayed in there for a little while longer, and finally I did get out. And during that time, my parents were going through a divorce, which really messed with me more because I didn't want my parents to split up, man. We came to this country together as a family unit. And as much as there was dysfunction in our family and there was a lot of tumultuous interactions. Like I didn't want my family to break up. So while I'm locked up, you guys are splitting up. They're separating and then they're divorcing. So now I get out of juvie and I'm going to my mom's house. And we would get into it. Oh, mind you, the second I got out, I was greeted at that one school, the F up school, right? With people that had blunts and joints and hits of ass. I mean, I was loaded by first period. So there was no there's no way I could turn it down. Like I wanted to get high. So I move into my mom's. I'm high on the first day I'm out of juvie. And I would get into it with my mother. You know, at the time I was 17 going on 18. I was this kid that had body dysmorphia. I was not satisfied with my body. I saw other people have these muscles in high school, and I asked this one and that one, and they said we go down to Mexico and we get steroids. And so, in order for me to overcome my body dysmorphia, I start putting this stuff in my body to enhance my muscles and make me look more attractive and bigger. And on top of that, the steroids would fuel the rage within, right? So now I'm this monster that's just like becoming a huge dude, um, pulling all the women, you know, thinking that I'm really somebody. The ego's just getting stroked. It's just growing right within me. And I would get into physical fights with people. I would get into arguments with my mother. I would punch holes in the walls. There was a lot of rage, right? Um, I never understood the psychology behind punching holes in the walls because you're messing up the wall and you're messing up your knuckle. But definitely, I think it's just this anger. I just want to hit things, right? And so I get into it with her, and I go to my dad's house, and he lived on the other side of town. And me and my pops, we'd be cool for a little while, but he'd say some stuff to me that like wouldn't sit well with me, and then I get into it with him. And by the time I turned 18 years old, I was like a man that could hold my own. And for once in my life, when my dad said something I didn't agree with, I put up a fight and I got physical with him. And I put my hands on that man. You know, as much as he would put his hands on me growing up and he felt a lot of remorse a lot of times after he beat me. I felt the same way with him.
So
And
let me ask you a question really quick,
sure,
because you obviously had a lot of trauma and you had a lot of emotional baggage already get stuffed down in you. You're not
yeah,
dealing with it, you know. And you've heard me mention this before. Gabor Mate, who's like a hero of mine, he
hmm,
talks about sometimes when he's giving a talk, he'll ask the crowd, is heroin addictive, yes or no? Is alcohol addictive, yes or no? You know, is
yeah,
cocaine addictive, yes or no? Is
hmm,
sex addictive, yes or no? And he says the answer is embedded in the question, depending on the amount of pain you need to soothe.
hmm,
And you brought up a priest coming to carry the message to you in juvie, right?
yes,
And there's just a Jesuit saying, give me your child for the first 7 years, and I'll tell you the man they'll become.
hmm.
Now, if you look at your early childhood, did that already make up the perfect storm to become an addict? Um,
That's a great question. That is a great question. You know, a lot of people say I was born in. There's a lot of people in the 12-step world when they tell the story. They say I believe I was born an alcoholic. I believe I was born an addict. I don't believe I was born an addict or an alcoholic. I believe that I believe wherever we are raised, whatever we're raised around, we imitate our atmosphere. So let's say, for example, you know how I said my mom decided, do we want to go to Iran or do we want to raise our kids in America? What if I grew up in Iran? What if they'd taken us there, my sister and I? Would I turn into a methamphetamine heroin addict? I don't I don't necessarily think so. I may have grown up around other people, but perfect storm to become an addict based off of the life happenings that happened here in America for me growing up, between feeling less than in my like in Utah, or feeling out of place because I was a different race. Um, I made excuses within myself to get outside of myself. And what how did I do that? Because I started hanging out with other people that felt different too, that were experimenting with drugs, and because they were doing it and I was seeing them doing it, I did it too.
and then, I also hear a lot of tragic moments. And how did that create the voice in the head and negative narrative in your mind that you probably weren't aware of? And you're starting to speak unhealthy about yourself. And a lot of times in science, you'll hear them say children are narcissists. in the developmental sense, because we don't know, we take everything personally. Like when
Yeah.
my father left my family, I took it personally. Like I remember thinking in my mind, if I would have just been a better son, more lovable, my dad would have
Yeah.
stayed with us. I took the blame in my head, and that started to create a false narrative in my mind. And I listened to it because I was unconscious. You know, a lot of times trauma is the loss of self, right? And
Hmm.
recovery is to get back. And
Right.
I heard a TED talk one time, and the gentleman said, you know, what do you say? He said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection.
Connection.
And you can see where these events, these painful experiences, and not knowing how to cope with them or talk about them, and so on, and deal with them in healthy ways,
Hmm.
um, they get trapped in me and they knock me out of self. You
Yes.
know, and I could hear that, and you explain it so beautifully in your story how you started to have all these emotions and these feelings, the inability to talk. How did that affect you? Do you, now looking back at that little child, do you see how you kind of didn't have a chance?
Right. I mean, you know what? I see my girlfriend's kid right now. He's 9 years old, and I think to myself, how was my little 9-year-old brain?
Mm.
The kid is a debater. He's debating everything all the time. He thinks he's right about everything. We catch him in lies constantly. I was lying from a very young age. I was sneaky. I was hiding things. What was I trying to hide? I was trying to hide. I didn't want people to really see my truth, but I didn't even know what my own truth was that young, right? I was developing my narrative most definitely. And I think that a lot of the negative self-talk that was within me conflicted with the positive self-talk that was being taught to me, for example, by my mother. My mother empowered me. My mother nurtured me. My mother came with strong amounts of love. My dad came with love, but he came with rage at other times. So I was taking on, we even like Don Miguel Ruiz when he talks in the Four Agreements about how we're raised with the victim and the judge within us, right? Where was the judgment within me? Why was I so quick to judge so many people on the outside? It was because I was judgmental of myself, and rather than focus on me and seeing who I am, I'll find everything wrong with you. And so that's
Mm.
the way I was. I was judging people, such as the guy that beat me up in front of everybody. I was judging the people that would say you're the guy that killed the kid on the bicycle. I was judging my father that would make me feel less than or lower because I didn't hold my own and didn't fight back. Because it was an embarrassment for my father, I think, to see his son get beat up. He would have liked to have a son that was tough and tough like him and would be able to hold his own. So I think the negative self-talk definitely started at a very young age and kind of just developed into like an adolescent period.
Yeah, thank you. You brought up about the genes, and a lot of times in the 12-step communities, they say it's in our genes. We're born this way, and then they talk about the disease model, right? And
Hmm.
we've talked a lot about the disease model ourselves together, and the disease model is misleading because it ignores what really happened. I think
Hmm.
it's always important to look at our upbringing, and there's one thing they don't talk about in the 12-step community, and I wish they eventually will, is epigenetics, which means above the genes, right? And we've
Hmm.
learned, like Bruce Limpton would say, it's by changing our perception um, about ourselves, about our life, in our environment, that can turn on and off our gene expression. So we are not victims of our genes; we are creators. Like kind of like in the Bible, we're made in the image of God. But if we
Hmm.
stick to this negative belief and we continue to not get rid of, clean up that stuff inside of us, and do that inner work, that shadow work,
Yeah.
we're always gonna you know we might eventually get loaded again. If we don't have do that inner work. I think like in the Gnostic text it says, what you find, what is within you, what you find will save you, what you do not
Hmm.
find it within you, what you do not find will destroy you. Or Carl Jung says, those who look outside dreams, those who look inside awakes. So we got to do inner work. How did you do did you eventually do inner work on yourself, and how did you heal? I know you have a beautiful story about healing from that situation when you hit that person, that person, with your car. Can
Hmm.
you touch on that, and how you started to heal, and start to you know how the healing process all took place to become recovered from addiction?
I'd like to work my way up to that to talk about that because that was like a turning point for me when I got into recovery. But I do know this, that all throughout my young adulthood, let's say from 18, 19, all the way up to 30 years of age, by the time I was 35 and I got sober, there was always within me, I believe it was the little soul. It was a small percentage of the goodness within me that knew the difference between wrong and right, but it had a very soft voice. My ego, which some people like to label as the disease of addiction or the devil within, had a very loud voice. It definitely had me in the grips of addiction, right? Like it would, anything that was good, I was always pushing out because I didn't want to have to feel that stuff. So I would keep using. And a lot, even in my mid 20s, people that would see me, they'd really think Pej has it going on because he slings drugs and he goes to strip clubs and he does. I mean, everything that could nurture the ego. I was living this lifestyle.
Mm.
I was the best drug dealer. I had the best drugs. People come to my house. Everybody responds to me. Everybody answers to me. I got the homies over here. They got my back and we'll fight together and nobody can mess with this. Because I talked about early on, I wanted to create an empire because I never was going to let anybody bring me down the way that guy did when I was an adolescent. Even when I would sell drugs to pregnant women or women with kids, I had this little, my conscience would tell me, this isn't right. What are you doing? You're going to sell this woman drugs and she's going to do the drugs, and that little fetus inside of her is going to potentially become addicted to the drugs. This isn't right. But I would say, I need the money. I don't care. I don't want to feel like, I don't want to feel bad. Right. So by the time I was 30, I started having more police interaction, getting locked up more, being reintroduced to the 12-step world, not being interested in the 12-step world. Between 30 and 35 years of age, I ran my life into the ground so much to the point where I was a homeless man.
Mm.
And when I was a homeless man, my ego was still so big that because I lived out of my car, I think I was like those homeless people that live in tents and live on the outside of the storefronts. If anything, like, don't label me homeless or I'm executive homeless, right? Because I have a car, right? But reality was I was dying inside, spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally. I was a scared little boy that probably potentially stunted his spiritual and mental and emotional growth from the time I first started using drugs at the age of 12, right? And so when I was 30, I got out of jail and my mom took me to a Persian sober living. This is before I became homeless, right? And in that Persian sober living, there was this little man that answered the door, and his name was Siamak. We called him Sia. And he looked, and I mean, he kind of looked like Yoda, right? Like a little Persian recovery Yoda. Kind of sounded like Yoda with a Persian accent. And I remember he opened the door and he's like, "Hello, welcome. This is sober living. We have rules, we have regulations, we have chores. We go to meetings." And I just looked at him. I'm like, riveting. But my ego wasn't going to stay there to take on any of this stuff because there's too much talk of recovery. I wasn't ready to recover yet. I was 30 years old, fresh out of jail. I went and looked at this house, didn't stay at his house, went to somebody else's house, and I worked my way back into my mom's life and house. From 30 to 34, I lived a lifestyle that took me to the streets. And when I was a homeless man at the age of 35, almost 36, when life wasn't working anymore, there was a series of events that happened that were eye-opening, that led me into the path of recovery without me even knowing I was about to go in the path of recovery. I called my mom one last time after 7 months of homelessness, and she told me, she had me write down somebody's phone number. When I wrote down that person's phone number, he led me to a house in a whole other town. And when I knocked on that door, that little Persian recovery Yoda from 5 years before answered that door. I don't think that happened by mistake.
Mm.
I don't think that happened by mistake. I know we have a close-knit community in our recovery world, but to be at the front doorstep of a man's house that I met 5 years before at a whole different house, they say, is it odd or is it God? I looked in that man's eyes and I said, I know you. He said, I don't know you. I said, how do you not know me? I was at your house. You had a house in Beach Boulevard 5 years before. He said, "Yeah, I had the house. I don't remember you." And I said, "How would you not remember me?" He goes, "Because I remember the ones that stay, not the ones that keep going back out and doing the same song and dance." And when I went into his house, this guy was a straight shooter, man. This guy was a man of recovery, former bank robber that never got busted, former heroin addict that tried to quit 19 times, and finally on the 20th time he got it right. And he brought me in. I came in with a big ego, with a lot of old ideas, and we were in constant conflict with each other. And we had a lot of power struggles in the beginning. But over a period of time, I put my guard down, and the little soul started to get a louder voice. And I started realizing, you know what? This guy is a good man. And this guy's trying to save you from you. And this guy's living within this recovery home, dedicated and devoting his life to helping people. What are you fighting against? And so, because I had a lot of old ideas, I was still a liar, a cheat, and a thief, right? So I would sit in groups and I would lie through my teeth, and I had a master plan to still get high when I get out of here. But I got called out on that by that guy, because that man would read between the lines. He was like, he was very intuitive. Like, he was very, very smart when it came to realizing who's full of. He would say, you know, Pej, you're so inauthentic. You're inauthentic about your own inauthenticity. I'm like, I have no idea what that means. He said, you want me to break it down for you and simplify it? I said, sure. He goes, you're so full of shit. You're full of shit about being full of shit. I was like, ugh, that doesn't sound good. And then I had to like go a little deeper and think about it. I'm like, so I'm that bad at trying to pull one over on this guy that I'm pulling one over on myself without even knowing I'm pulling one over on myself. Like, that's really bad. One night after he called me out in a group and I lied through my teeth and I wasn't about to come clean in front of my peers, he went back to his office, and he would often sit in his office for hours and just read. And I remember, like, something happened within me where I thought, I need to go get honest with this guy. And I went into his office and I sat down and I said, hey, can I talk to you, Mr. Sia? And he said, yeah. We sat down and I said, listen, I want you to know something. I lied through that whole group today. He said, I knew you were lying. I said, how'd you know? He goes, the whole room knew you were lying. I'm like, so nobody believed me? I said, Pej. He said, Pej, like, I don't expect you to change right away, but if you don't start getting honest with yourself, you're not going to make it very far in this world. Not in recovery, not in life. I said, okay, so what do I do? He said, why don't you tell me a little bit about your life so I get to know you better, and then I can tell you what my recommendations are. I said, how much time you have? He said, 2 hours. I said, all right. I told my life story. He said, I think we need to do this thing for you called a psychodrama. I'm like, what's a psychodrama? He said, you'll see. My mom wasn't visiting me during the time that I was in his recovery home. It really hurt my feelings because I really hadn't talked to her in a long time and I missed her. And 2 weeks later, he had this family group, very powerful, he would have these multicultural family groups where he'd get all of the different clients in his homes, families to come together in this room. And we were in a big circle and we would all interact with each other. He'd require that the other families members be in recovery too, like Al-Anon or CODA, Codependency Anonymous, because our community has a lot of codependency. And on that night, my mom came. And she was sitting over there and she didn't even say hi to me. And my peers were there. My sister was there. Even my sponsor in AA came. He told me, I'm just going to walk you through this. I said, what are we doing? He said, we're going to do a psychodrama, like I said. And I go, what is that? He goes, just be with me, Pej. One of the clients had a 12-year-old kid. He had the 12-year-old kid come and lay on the ground, and he put a bed sheet over that kid's body. Mm. He told me to walk around the room. He dimmed the lights and kind of he made the aura of the room very, calming. And he had me walk around the room, and he started saying, so tell us about the day of your car accident. I said, what do you want to know? He said, just be with me, Pej, because I kept like jumping ahead. He was like, just be with me. What was it like that day? I said, well, that morning I woke up, I was excited, even though I was hungover from the night before, excited to call my friends and tell them all to be ready for me to go pick them all up. And one by one, they all piled into my car, my girlfriend, my sister, everybody. said, what was the music playing on the radio? I go, yeah. He goes, what was playing? I said, Summer of '69, Brian Adams. I remember it like it was yesterday. He said, what else was going on? I said, well, the windows were rolled down. I could smell the fresh lemon trees in the air. And the streets were wet. So, like, the car was kind of sliding around a little bit. I said, okay. Then what happened? I said, and then I approached this intersection. And before I got to the intersection, it happened within one instance in flash. I saw this kid right in front of my car and I couldn't hit the brakes fast enough. And he went right over the hood of my car. Then, like, as I'm telling this and talking about it, the tears are rolling down my face, and I'm looking at my mom sitting over there. And her face was shaking, and there was tears in her eyes. The whole room was in tears, right? I mean, come on, Persians, man, they get emotional. He said, "Okay, come over here for a sec, Pej." After I went through all the motions of everything that went down, he said, "Come over here and get down on one knee." And he was already down on one knee, and he had me put my hand on top of this live kid that's under this blanket. He said, "Put your hand on top of this." I could feel his chest. He said, "What was the name of the kid that you hit on the bicycle?" I said, "His name was David." He said, "Tell David how you feel about him losing his life. This is representing the corpse of the kid that you hit." I'm like, "Sia, please don't do this to me, man. This is heavy." He goes, "Just be with me. Do this." I said, "Listen, David, I want you to know I'm so sorry that you lost your life. I never expected for you to lose your life. If I could go back and relive that day, I wouldn't have gone up that street." I said, "Okay, now tell him about your life." I said, "My life? What do you mean, my life? I don't have a life. I've never had a life. I don't know what having a life is like." He goes, "Okay, so tell him, do you want to make a commitment, Pej?" I said, "Yeah, I'll make a commitment." He said, "What's your commitment, Pej?" I said, "I want to help every single addict and alcoholic one day at a time, of every race, creed, and color, one day at a time for the rest of my life." He said, "You really want to make that commitment?" And I said, "Yeah." And I looked over at my mom's face, my sponsor's face, my sister's face, all my peers. And I had this thought in my mind for 1 second. It was the little soul. It said, "Don't screw this up. Move forward. You've been waiting for this day for many, many years." It was the most healing moment without me even knowing that I was healing right then. I woke up the next morning. I felt like 1,000 pounds had been lifted off my back. This was, Boo Boo, that was my absolute turning point for recovery. That is where I made this decision. No more smoking weed secretly eventually. No more drinking. No more going back to the old lifestyle. I'm moving forward and I'm going to be on the path of recovery. Mm-hmm. So then how do I get in recovery? Like, now that I'm taking this thing serious, what am I going to do different? I got into the steps of the 12 steps. I worked the 12 steps. I got over my hang up of not believing in God or higher power. And it wasn't just because I was reading the big book, this might sound cocky, but it's my truth. I believe I had a psychic change and I made a decision not to use or drink anymore before I even got into the 12 steps. I didn't need to have spiritual awakening to decide I'm not going to get high anymore. I believe that event with Mr. Sia, the psychodrama, was definitely the onset of me making that decision, but also like something within myself said I got to do this 100%. Now, I did develop a relationship with a loving higher power, which I call God. I know a lot of people get caught up on the word God and labels, and I know it's consciousness, and I definitely felt the consciousness of my creator, and I still feel it on a daily basis. I don't think that God keeps me sober. I hear a lot of people when they share in 12-step meetings, they say, I'm sober as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous and all credit goes to God. And like, yeah, I mean, you know what, if I'm very humble in the way that I speak, it's a lot different than the way that I act. If I say all credit goes to God no matter what for me. Like, God brought me this far to be able to do what I do, but I give myself a lot of credit to stay sober. I have done that inner child work. I've tapped into who I was as a kid and the way I would live carefree and the happiness that I carried within my heart and the way that my mother nurtured me to be a good kid. Now I can go back and recreate myself and go back to that original form, the restoration, if you will, as as it talks about in the 12 steps too, right? Um, I was, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I uh I wanted to stop right there because you said you had an awakening before the 12 steps. And most people don't realize that the whole purpose of the 12 steps is to have an awakening. Some people may have it like I have, just like you. I had it the day I woke up, and I had an inner shift in me. And I knew from that day forward, I was no longer going to live, drink, and party and live the way I was living anymore. I knew I was awakened from that delusion and those illusions of separateness and that all that stuff. I was pretty clear to me. I had an awakening before the 12 steps. It's, it comes to people, and we don't know how it comes. It comes mysteriously. You know, some people have it before. I know old timers that hide the fact that they never did the 12 steps. And people get judged because they're afraid of being judged. We don't know when we're going to have an awakening. I had it beforehand. It was through pain. I was in a lot of pain, and I had that moment of clarity, which it sounds like you had too. And I love your story. I love
I
your
had a lot of
story.
moments of clarity. If there's something I actually want to say about that stuff, as I said, I was a reader, so I was always studying things. I had my first sponsor in AA was a fan of Emmett Fox. So besides the fact that we were going through the 12 steps of AA, we were also studying books by Emmett Fox extensively. And the second I would see Jesus, I was turned off to that, right? Because I thought, oh my God, that's like low key Christianity. And I've already gone to Christian churches and Mormon churches and Catholic churches, and I've done all my research. I read the Bible when I was locked up a lot of times, right? So like I had, but I thought I was turned off to seeing the name Jesus. Not that I don't like Jesus. I think Jesus, if Jesus really existed, was a good man that hopefully was in his purest form trying to help people. But like I would read Emmett Fox's books and think this is powerful. Like this is actually I want to keep an open mind to this. Or I started studying Marianne Williamson. But here's something that stood out to me. First of all, I want to let it be known. Spiritual and this is my outlook. Spiritual experiences happen all the time.
Hmm.
They happened when I was on drugs. There was a lot of spiritual experiences when I was on drugs. When I'm streaking at a rave running through a field listening to tons of music on ecstasy, candy flipping or hippie flipping, like that is a very spiritual experience within itself. Not to promote or condone people going and doing LSD, but a lot of people that when they do LSD, they say they have some of their most spiritual moments within their own thought processes. The problem is the come down of it or the withdrawals of it or coming off of it, the way that we wear the brain down, then it can become depressing or you can become suicidal and have the suicidal ideation because you're really taking a lot out of yourself. But for me, the spiritual experiences happened all the way up. Everything that led me up to finally wanting to get sober were all spiritual experiences. And then check this out. While in rehab, while in that recovery home, this is a spiritual experience within itself. And I think you might like this because I think we're both fans of this man. I would sit and there was on Monday nights, they had these educational classes for the people in rehab. And they were usually videos, and sometimes they broke down the frontal cortex of the brain and this and that. And I was so bored, man. I don't want to hear this shit. I'm coming off a meth bender, and I don't want to even learn all of this educational, scientific stuff, right? But every once in a while on a Monday, Mr. Sia would bring out this thing called The Secret. It was a DVD of this thing called The Secret. And you would hear these spiritual practitioners come on there, and you saw this guy with like dreadlocks, Michael Beckwith. And like he had dreadlocks, and I was like, the way that he talked and the way some of the other practitioners talked, it was like, law of attraction. It was straight up like talking about you create your energy. And if you're going to have a positive outlook in life and you be and act positive, your energy will be positive. And if you're going to be negative, you're going to be stuck in that, that negative thinking, that negative self-talk, that depressive thought process. I think between the steps and reading the bedevilments and seeing that prey to misery, when it's saying like I'm a prey to misery, and hearing Siamak, like in some of his groups, tell a client something like, there's nothing I can do for you because you're committed to misery. He's saying committed to misery. The big book's saying the prey to misery. I'm seeing The Secret. So I'm watching The Secret. I'm like, I'm enthralled by The Secret. I love watching The Secret. Every other week when we would do educational, I'd say, can we watch more of The Secret? And by the time I was a year and a half sober, as a person that grew up as the biggest Prince fan in the entire world, I won a contest to go to Prince's house. Prince, the musician, right? The greatest musician of all time. Fight me, argue me on that. But that guy was the best of the best,
It
right?
was a mystic, right?
He was a mystic. I went to his house. He was a mystic. We are all mystics. We're all of humanity. Every human being is a mystic. The only problem is not
We're not
enough of us.
attuned to it. We're not
We don't
attuned to
tap.
it. Yeah.
We don't tap into that like our mystical qualities, which is at the end of the day, it's love. It's shedding the ego. It's being of service, and it's truly living in God's light. Because as much as God is